What's up, guys? Jared here. So, The Matrix Resurrections is out. For those of you that know me well, you know that The Matrix was a big, big influence on my life, probably the single biggest influence that I can think of. So, this review is going to be broken into three parts. First, I'm going to be talking about its qualities just as a movie. Then, I'm going to be moving on to my thoughts about the plot. And then finally, at the end, I'm going to be talking about the philosophy that I think the movie is espousing and talking about the pros and cons of all of it. I am looking forward to having you guys participate in the discussion. I'm going to try, I have so many notes. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. And so, if I don't see your comments, forgive me. So first off, let's just start with some of the kind of qualitative aspects of the movies. First of all, Keanu and Carrie Ann are good. I think that it's a good performance from Keanu, and I think that some of the strongest parts of the movie are when Keanu Reeves does kung fu. I mean, he's like a 50-something-year-old man, and he still looks like a freaking badass when he's doing those quick action punches and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's always really nice to see. Even though Trinity only gets a couple of lines as the actual character Trinity, they are powerful, and I think that they do work. And it made me really realize how much I miss Carrie Ann inhabiting that character because she is very unique in the way that she, as an action star, and it's kind of sad that she hasn't really carried on in like kind of an action career like Keanu has. So those are some good things. I think some of the new future elements were really cool. I think that the way that the programs embody themselves with those magnetic particles are pretty cool. I think that the mirror, instead of jacking in through, or excuse me, instead of getting into the Matrix through phones, I thought that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, the action was not very good. And there's probably a lot of reasons for this. And I think when you're approaching a text that's as unique as this one and that has as many unique elements as this one that actually try to call attention to the limitations and the decisions that led to it being produced, I think it kind of asks you to kind of, consider the fact that, so for example, in the sequels, Keanu Reeves, Carrie Ann Moss, Lawrence Fishburne, Hugo Weaving, they all had like upwards of 6 months, more than 6 months of training time with Yen Wu Ping, like the de facto master of martial arts choreography from Hong Kong. There's no Yen Wu Ping in this movie, and it shows. And it hurt, because when I think of The Matrix, I don't only think of ideas. I don't only think of special effects. I don't only think of Keanu Reeves and Carrie Ann Moss. I think of John Woo inspired practical effects of action scenes that are using real actors, training actors, action scenes that don't have quick cuts. I mean, that fluid tracking shot in the first Matrix, the first time that we see Neo do kung fu after he's been, they teach him all the kung fu through jacking it in, and then we see this actor, Keanu Reeves, in a fluid tracking shot, no cuts, doing kung fu like he's Jet Li. That's so powerful, and that's the kind of things that this doesn't have. It doesn't achieve. And granted, again, the whole point of the first hour of the movie is Lana Wachowski telling us that, hey, I didn't want to make this movie, but it was either that or someone else was going to make it. So if someone's going to ruin my baby, then goddamn it, it's going to be me. Not that I think she ruined it, but we'll get to that. And so, yeah, Warner Brothers wanted it quick. They needed something for holiday 2021. And so they said, guess what? No training time, no Yen Wu Ping, smaller budget. You're not going to get to revolutionize special effects like you did in the first one and like you tried to do in 2 and 3. Take it or leave it. Question, are the visuals impressive enough to have to see in theaters, or should I save my money and watch it on HBO at home? Well, since we are talking about special effects, I do want to talk about HBO in depth a little bit later. But since we are talking about special effects, I would say absolutely not. Save your money. You can see it at HBO. Another thing that really bothered me, that disappointed me about the action, is that it seems unfortunate that Lana didn't learn from one of the big mistakes of specifically the second movie, and that is that the action scenes have no stakes. when Neo fought Smith during the Burly Brawl, that was basically just an exhibition match. There was no purpose in the plot. There was nothing really at stake here. It was just, pure spectacle for the sake of spectacle. And we see the same thing here. When Neo fights Smith, there's really no reason. There's nothing that Neo is trying to achieve. There's nothing at stake in terms of his personal development. It's just kind of a callback and just see what we can do. Similarly with Morpheus, even less so than in the first one when they do the dojo scene or the recreation of the dojo scene. It's not, we're not actually experiencing with Neo this realization uh, of the consequences of living in a digital world. When we saw that first movie, we were like, this was the first time we were like, wow, anything is possible when you free your mind in this digital world. Look at Keanu Reeves. That dude was in rom-coms. Now he's kicking ass like Kung Fu. It was, it moved the self-realization plot forward. In this, it was nothing. And that was a lot of the problems with the second movie, and it was kind of disappointing to see it again repeated in this movie. Another thing is that the movie looked very digital. It was not shot on film like the first three movies are. And I think that, again, this is a criticism that can be taken with a grain of salt. But, a lot of people have said that the movie feels like Matrix like a fan film. And I kind of agree. Something is weird about the agents, the way that they look. I mean, they look like, we've all seen people cosplaying as agents just with a regular suit and glasses. And honestly, when I saw those agents photographed within the movie, they didn't look any more real than that. And I think that, I think that film grain and the authenticity of film, especially when, our frame of reference is the original trilogy that's shot on film, I think that's really important for suspension of disbelief. Another thing is that, look, I'm grateful that we got Keanu Reeves and Carrie Ann Moss back, but the love story was never a selling point of The Matrix. It was never a strong point of the original trilogy. It was, honestly, I've seen the third movie many times, and I've honestly been pretty checked out of the movie by the time Trinity dies in the third one every time. I don't know anybody who has felt particularly emotional during that part. And to see that being the central, I guess, selling point of this installment, I think, again, Lana's doing the best with what she has. And what she had was two actors that were willing to commit out of a total of four that she should have had. And so, again, so she just emphasized the love story. And I think that Carrie Ann and Keanu, they do a pretty good job with the situation as well. Neil Patrick Harris. I don't think Neil Patrick Harris as an actor is either menacing or enigmatic like the architect was. And so to see him basically be the successor to the architect was a bit of a disappointment. I thought that was a very strange casting choice. So Yahya Abdul-Mateen, I actually like this guy a lot. I think in Watchmen, the HBO series, he's actually one of the standout performances, and he's also in that Black Mirror episode, and I thought he was quite good. In this one, I thought he was all right. Young Morpheus was, again, doing the best they could with what they had, but honestly, it was fine. I don't really have much more to say about that. And then lastly, before I move on to the plot, I just want to say that things would be a lot better if we got Hugo Weaving and Lawrence Fishburne. In fact, when Neo, as a computer or a game developer, goes to meet his business partner and it's quote unquote Smith, I think that could have been a really special moment to see Neo and Smith, Keanu Reeves and Hugo Weaving sitting across from each other like people who have developed something and created something together over a long period of time, but their relationship had been strained. And man, poor Matrix, I guess they always have these recasting problems. They had it when Gloria Foster died and they had to recast the Oracle in the second and third film. And then this new guy being Agent Smith. To be honest, I wish they just retired the character entirely. And honestly, I feel the same way about Morpheus. It just takes you out of it, and it's not even a reflection on those actors being inadequate. It's just, for a movie that capitalizes so much on nostalgia, like, we want the authentic thing. So, all right, let's move on to the plot. The plot of this movie, when compared to the sequels, is actually pretty clear, pretty cogent. It's relatively easy to follow, and I think that's a positive thing. I think that as intellectually stimulating as the sequels can be, I don't think anyone particularly likes them because they're confusing. Um, the big This movie is too much exposition. In fact, if I were to liken the structure and the feel of this movie to another movie that came out this year, it would be Mortal Kombat. Because in Mortal Kombat, again, what is at stake is this tournament is going to decide the fate of the world, and our heroes need to save the world. But in Mortal Kombat, the tournament never even happens. We just lead up to the tournament. We basically have an overture to the tournament. In this movie, it's kind of similar, but it's even in some ways even creates even more of a sin than in Mortal Kombat, because it's very open-ended in terms of what the conflict actually is. In the third act, it's like a heist. We need to get Trinity back. It's a love story. That makes sense. But in terms of the warring factions, we get this exposition that there was peace, but then the machines needed more power. They weren't getting enough power, so there was basically a new factions were split, and there are some humans and some machines on both sides. But we really don't know what the factions really represent or what the disagreement is. And because of that, it's kind of hard to tell what exactly the ultimate goal is. Is it to destroy the Matrix? No, because then I guess as the movie proved earlier, that would just make the machines die because they were warring with each other when they didn't have enough power. So I guess the ultimate, or the decision that is ultimately, is that we need to create a less abusive form of the Matrix, kind of like remake society. But again, really only at the end do Neo and Trinity say, all right, yeah, that's what we're going to do. So again, this is just very much an overture to something else. And look, like, that would never fly back in the day. Like, and it's not that they don't know that they're doing this. They know that, like, most movies have concrete endings, which allows a movie to be distinguished from something like television, in that it makes more of like a definitive ideological statement, in that it has an ending and therefore is forced to, in a sense, make a claim a position. And in this one, they don't do that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. The other thing is that Neo, his powers in the real world were retconned. I mean, whatever. I don't know if it was a particularly good idea in the second two movies, but for a movie that seemed to be pretty preoccupied with keeping the lore consistent with what happened in the second and third movies, that was a pretty glaring omission. It wasn't even really talked about. They talked about, hey man, was it true that you could fly? But nobody ever talked about, hey, was it true that you could control sentinels and destroy things within the real world too? Um, The other thing is that I feel like the setup for the next inevitable movie, which was something that I think I was a little bit too idealistic when I made my last video about my predictions for this movie. I very much assumed that this was going to be, the final installation, but I think that was just pure naivete on my part, because obviously, no, this franchise is being brought back so people subscribe to HBO Go. I mean, that's why. Literally, that is why. And you know, so say what you will about that, but we have the same problem we had with the end of the first movie, and that is that, oh, okay, great. Neo's like invincible now. He can remake the Matrix as he saw fit. So at the beginning of the second movie, are we going to nerf his powers so that there's a more, there's more of a conflict? Basically, we have the same conflict problem with the beginning of the second movie. So ultimately, before I move on to the really meta stuff, did I enjoy it? Honestly, for the first hour of the movie, I felt very, very uncomfortable. And the reason why is because of this meta stuff. Like, I found it to be heartbreaking. I felt so bad for Lana. The fact that not only was she put into this situation where Warner Brothers has basically put her is blackmailing her, or basically it's like a ransom situation. Warner Brothers is saying, "Hey, well, we got this script. We're going to make it without you unless you want to, but we don't need you, and we can do that. Fuck you." Um, that's a horrible situation to be in. I also felt so bad that bad for her for all of the mental breakdown that she went through and is very much reflecting on after the success of The Matrix 1. I mean, it's obviously very much I mean, I feel like I don't even need to say it, but yes, it's obvious that Neo as the programmer, Thomas Anderson, is a stand-in for Lana, or maybe Lana and Lily, after the success of the first Matrix movie. Instead of it being a game, it was a movie. There's a fat guy who is one of the kind of producers that surrounds the game, and he keeps on saying bullet time, bullet time. That's what people want. So this is a reference to Joel Silver. Joel Silver was, before The Matrix, he was a classic Hollywood action producer. He produced like Predator and all these action movies. And then he produced The Matrix. And then once that took off, he was like, oh, bum, bum, bang. You know, Joel Silver's like one of these Hollywood businessmen, and he pushed the Wachowskis to do all of this crazy stuff, to make it into a video game, to make it a franchise. And what I think that this is revealing is that that was very abusive because they weren't ready. Lana was not ready for this kind of success. Lana was not ready to take something to have her baby kind of taken away from him and basically be caught up in this system. Um, and another thing that made me feel very uncomfortable was that I felt like I was taking part of this abuse of Lana. I was in someone who was leveling these huge expectations at her, just like everybody else was. Just like Joel Silver's character was saying, hey, we're going to remake cinema and remake action movies just like we did again. Man, who wants that kind of pressure on them? You know, and I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that the action scenes are a little less ambitious in this movie, because Lana doesn't want to deal with a freeway chase scene that takes 7 months to film and causes like 14 panic attacks a day or something like that. I mean, that I don't actually know. But yeah, for the first hour of this movie, I felt like, wow, I am seeing art as therapy. And they always say you shouldn't have art be your therapy. But in a sense, you know, Warner Brothers threatened her to say, we're going to make this with or without you. And so she said, well, guess what? I'm going to do it, and I'm going to piss all over it like a dog marking its territory and make it extremely personal, then try to take it away from me. Or rather, that's her response to it being taken away from her. Um, I, oh, Death by Media says Chad being a Chad as well as a Chad and being the Wick director was pretty funny. I actually didn't notice that. Um, that's a good one. Um, okay, so look, I mean, I always said that my biggest concern was that it was going to be big and dumb, and I would rather it be thoughtful and bad than big and dumb and bad. And at the end of the day, we got something that was ambitious. We got something that was a wild swing. But I got to tell you, I don't think the meta thing is as daring as everybody thinks it is, or even as much as Lana thinks it is. Or maybe it is. Or maybe, I don't know. But to be honest, like most of the whole thing with like trivializing all of and making fun of all the successes of the initial Matrix, and then kind of, so like, you know, for the first hour, we get this very kind of ironic postmodern criticism that, you know, reflects on all of the legacy of the Matrix and kind of pokes fun at these things that were at one point very compelling and now have kind of become memes that are a little bit divorced from their meaning, which is, I guess, very Baudrillard-esque. And then in the second half of the movie, we basically just lean in to those same storytelling techniques that they made fun of in the first hour. To be honest, I don't really think that this, as a form of critique, is really any more biting than Deadpool. I mean, it's like when Deadpool says, "Oh, look, they're going to do a superhero landing," and then they do it anyway and kind of like relish in the same things that they criticize. Um, I uh, I think this movie is kind of doing the same thing. I think it's more personal, but I don't think that it's any more biting. Craig says, "Are we sure Warner Brothers was going to make the movie with or without her, or could that have all have been fiction?" Uh, I have a friend who read the script that was submitted uh, to Warner Brothers, and so they had a script. They were ready. So yes, they were going to do it with or without her. I don't know if they would have gotten Keanu, but they don't care. They're going to do it anyway. Um, a lot of people have been saying that this is bold of her because she's sticking it to Warner Brothers. She's revealing them. She's revealing that they are, just abusive and shallow and overly business driven, etc. But the truth of the matter is that that's not a threat to Warner Brothers. And as a matter of fact, I'm reminded of the movie Network. And for those of you who have watched my channel recently, you know that that's a movie that I talk about a lot. In fact, my friend Mateus and I are considering teaching a whole online class about the movie Network. But anyway, in the movie Network, which is also very much about systems, specifically capitalism. It's basically the ultimate capitalism always wins movie. And in the movie, basically, this very capitalist company hires these communists to make content on their TV channel. And the communist says, "I'm not going to do that because you're going to censor me." And the capitalist says, "No, you do whatever you want. You say whatever you want." And I think that if we look at what Lana says through Neo or through the Agent Smith character as, again, like Warner Brothers, exposing them or whatever, no, Warner Brothers doesn't care what she says. If she criticizes Warner Brothers, it just makes Warner Brothers more powerful. It just makes the system more powerful. And here's the great irony, this gross, tragic irony is that just like Neo's rebellion only made the Matrix being the system that perpetuated war between humans and machines in the sequels, Neo's rebellion only made the Matrix stronger. And similarly in this one, Lana's rebellion against Warner Brothers only makes Warner Media stronger. And I don't know if that's what she's pointing out to, because people are saying, like, "Oh, well, it's very meta because, we're talking about the production of the movies." But I'm saying it's not meta enough because Lana is not commenting on the fact that even her rebellion, just like in the second movie, is only strengthening the system. Now, this is a movie that very much points to its edges. So we could make the argument that she is saying it, but I didn't see that level of awareness very clearly. And at the end of the day, I think that this is what this movie is. If I were to say that the original Matrix and the ensuing sequels were failed protest art because the message didn't get across, the postmodern critique of systems and power structures didn't get across, and the movie's message was co-opted by movements that Lana didn't agree with, this rather is failed protest art that wears its impotence on its sleeve, in the sense that, again, like, all it does is complain about the situation, complain that, "Hi, I'm Lana Wachowski. I'm stuck in the Matrix. I'm stuck in this exploitative cycle. I'm stuck in this hell." And then they just act out the hell. It basically is, I wouldn't say it's bragging about its impotence to actually protest anything, but it's just sad. It's not a empowering message at all. It's very, it almost, it's very it seems like Lana is resigning in a sense. And the saddest thing is that Lana is not Neo or Trinity at the end. Lana is Thomas Anderson, still stuck in the Matrix, motivated by the same fear and desire that Neil Patrick Harris's character talks about. She's probably sitting in a desk somewhere, writing a script for a movie that she doesn't want to make, that's going to come out on HBO Max, and that's fucking sad. So at the end of the day, I think that this movie is a desperate cry for help from the core of the Matrix itself. And Lana is one of the highest yielding copper tops of them all. And I mean, I don't like it's not enjoyable. It's just fucked up. Like that's, I'm sorry, Lana, that you're screaming for help and this movie is your expression of that. But I wouldn't say it was enjoyable to watch or that it was fun or that it was particularly insightful or that it was particularly thought-provoking or that it was exciting. It was just sad. All right, so let's talk about the philosophy. So, Baudrillard, the philosopher that supposedly inspired the first movie. In the first movie, famously, Neo takes out a book when he's selling an illegal program to the guy named Choi, who knocks on his door, and then his girlfriend is the girl who has the rabbit tattooed on her shoulder. He takes out a book called Simulacra and Simulation by Baudrillard, and it was said that that book is what ultimately inspired the movie. Now, Baudrillard lived long enough to see the first Matrix, and he famously said that The Matrix seems like the kind of movie that The Matrix would try to make. And I think that it's possible that Lana tried to address that in this one, in that she literally makes it, dramatizes it so that The Matrix is a movie that The Matrix makes, or a game, rather. But again, I think that really Baudrillard would just say the same thing, is that, well, because it's not meta enough, because ultimately this movie, The Matrix Resurrections, is still just perpetuating the very same system that it criticizes, this even still is a movie that The Matrix would make. So again, wearing its impotence on its sleeve or lack of self-awareness, I don't know. But basically, what was strange about this movie is that the subtext of parts 2 and 3 of Reloaded and Revolutions are basically the text in this one, because it's the same postmodern critique of power structures and systems, except it's just explicitly said rather than couched in the narrative. And at least to me, that's a lot less fun. So in the sequels, the systems of power that oppress both the humans and the machines can be likened to the systems that do that in our own world. Um, specifically with capitalism. And yes, there's even that line in the movie where there's like a kind of snooty looking bespectacled academic saying the Matrix is a metaphor for capitalist oppression, which it is. And in this one, we actually have Neil Patrick Harris explaining that he has created a kind of capitalist fear and desire producing machine that is identical to our own world and mirrors very much, the kind of exploitation and pain that Lana experienced after the first Matrix movie and continues to, I guess, struggle with. And so I was hoping that there would be some development, that The Matrix would be very much kind of a very modern film in that it distinguishes between real and unreal, and that Reloaded and Revolutions were the very postmodern movies in which they blur the line between real and unreal altogether and do a critique of systems, mostly in the discussions between Neo and Counselor Hammond, and then Neo and the Merovingian, and then ultimately Neo and the Architect. And then I was hoping that this movie might go to the next stage. That might be like maybe even a meta-modern take. That metamodernism is kind of a mix between postmodernism and modernism that kind of oscillates between irony and sincerity, or oscillates between the kind of ironic bemused detachment from kind of these classic stories, these myths that create meaning in our lives. Like The Matrix is very much, the original movie is very much inspired by the monomyth. It's kind of a recognition of the power of those, while also oscillating between that and the kind of postmodern lampooning of it. And now you can say that this movie does that by, again, making fun of it in the first hour of the movie, and then kind of leaning into those same narrative conventions that, you know, that have always kind of united tribes and appealed to people on a very emotional kind of tribal level, but it doesn't oscillate. And honestly, I think that that's again, like, I think that's just postmodern beginning, modern end, that explains a postmodern critique. I don't really think that it comes to like really present a meta modern perspective. I think really the only meta modern artists that we really have are Bo Burnham and Harmony Korine, to an example. So, I mean, look, if I was being really charitable about reading this movie, I would say maybe her conclusion is that like postmodern irony is better at waking people up than couching it in a monomyth or questioning physical reality. So maybe her attitude was that, oh well, my systems critique and power structures critique didn't work in the second two movies because it was, you know, hidden behind the architect saying very you know, cryptic stuff, and so now I'm just going to have Neil Patrick Harris just say it and have the literal plot being having to make or enable people to escape from this, you know, capitalist hellscape that abuses people. Um, to be honest, I thought the most interesting thing was the character of the analyst, Neil Patrick Harris's character. I found this to be probably the strongest and most interesting statement because basically, I'm going to share this image. Basically, I think this is the image, or excuse me, the statement that the character ultimately makes as the protector of the system. So this is a meme that says someone's sitting on a couch saying, I wish we could create a better society that wasn't inherently soul crushing. This is the conflict that Neo, as the stand in for Lana, goes through. And this is also what all of the Copper Tops are being subjected to by Neil Patrick Harris's character, a soul crushing society. And this is ultimately what Neo and Trinity promise to remake at the end. We're going to remake society so that it isn't soul crushing. And then the psychiatrist responds with, best I can do is pills that trick your brain into thinking that you don't hate it here. And that's kind of what the analyst character represents, is the fact that all we can do is try to fix your subjectivity to be more complacent and happier in this current shitstorm, because changing the world around you isn't an option. And I've thought that having uh having, you know, a psychologist and psychologist slash psychiatrist as kind of the guardian that keeps Neo from questioning the world around him, that stops him from questioning if things could be better. I thought that was actually pretty powerful, and that I honestly felt was more daring than writing yourself into the movie. So I want to change directions a little bit right now and make a confession. And the confession is that I saw this movie on HBO Max. I did not see it in the theater because I live in Finland right now and it doesn't come out until Christmas Day. And look, like, I appreciate the purity of the theater experience. It's something I'm always talking about, but I'm not a Buddhist monk. I mean, I can't wait 3 days to see a movie, the newest installment of a franchise that changed my life. So I did watch it on HBO Max. And part of me is actually wondering if that was the definitive experience. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit to the Mortal Kombat point I was making earlier, in that this is just kind of heavy exposition, more of an overture. And the reason I say that HBO Max might be the definitive way to function it is because, again, I mentioned earlier that back in the day, these development executives, these people that run the studios, they all are, you know, pretty educated in the art of screenwriting, and they know that a movie has to have an ending. A movie has to have a conflict, and that conflict has to have high stakes, whether emotionally or just in terms of scale, and it has to be resolved by the end of the movie, even if it's just one part in a trilogy. And so this would have never worked in the past. But today, I think it's actually, as the Joker would say, part of the plan. Because, I mean, first of all, the whole Agent Smith character, I don't even know why he is introduced other than just to, tease future installments because he's kind of the one conflict that hasn't really been resolved. Because ultimately, the meaning of this movie is to subscribe to HBO Max. In the same way that Mortal Kombat, it's an overture for more content. This movie is an overture for more content. It's trying to get you to subscribe. The platform is the message. If McLuhan was here, I'm pretty sure that's what he would say. And, I hope I'm not getting too cynical here, but I really do think that in this new business model, in this new platform economy, even the movies are part of the marketing plan. The movies themselves are just marketing for the platform. And because ultimately, the goal of this movie is to get people to subscribe. And so there's not going to be that critical voice that says, oh, no, your movie can't just be exposition. You actually have to define the conflict of what is dividing the two factions of humans and machines, or that you actually have to, such and so forth. And so in a way, I kind of cynically feel like this entire movie was just, and most movies that come out through like these platforms are just user acquisition efforts. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I got so many ads from Facebook and Google. I mean, because these platforms know that I'm a big Matrix fan, just like I'm sure if you're watching this, they know you're a big Matrix fan. This is the Matrix that we're stuck in. When Neil Patrick Harris talks about, fear and desire running the Matrix, I mean, he's basically describing advertising, which is the engine of this late stage capitalism. And so it's again like, is there virtue in that the movie kind of provokes enough thought to like look at this greater system that the movie itself is a victim of, just like Neo was a victim of a greater system in the second movie? I mean, I'm here talking about it. I'm grateful for that. Um, but again, at the end of the day, it's still a movie, you know? And I expect movies, maybe because I'm an old millennial, but I expect movies to, have a um, you know, certain pedigree. I expect them to have a differentiating factor between them and series. I expect them to be events. I expect them to have action that is more than just, and like this really did have a little bit of like a made by Netflix feel. So look, in conclusion, it's not all bad. Lana did what she could with what she had, and what she had was a bad scenario. And she wants us to know that. Now, I think that, we can argue and we can discuss the virtue of apologizing for something before you've done it. Uh, in general, I don't really like that. At the end of the day, I'm just a consumer. I don't really care what you had to go through. I don't really care about the behind the scenes stuff. I just want you to give me a fulfilling piece of entertainment, whether it be just keeping my time, fulfilling my time, keeping me entertained, or giving me, like spiritual nourishment. And I didn't really feel like this did any of that, but she's asking us to recognize that she did the best with what she could. And so I really think the best you can say about this movie is that it was a thoughtfully negotiated hostage situation. Um, at the end, this is a Matrix for a new time, a digital time, not something shot on film. This is a Matrix for a new business model, a business model that functions not on ticket sales but on subscription, a Matrix for a new platform economy, which means that it's trying to get you addicted to the platform. It's not trying to get you to watch the movie over and over again, although you can. It's trying to get you to, you know, feel like just to subscribe, to have this indefinite attachment to it that you will continue to give it money. So essentially what I'm saying is that this is a matrix for a new matrix, a new system. Anyway, that's it. So I know that was long-winded. Is it genius or is it garbage? I would say that, well, it's not good. It's not garbage. It's not all bad. But I mean, look, it wasn't the dream scenario. It wasn't just big and dumb. Although I did miss the big part. I said that like I don't want it to be just like big action scenes and like really dumb. But now that I got a movie without the big action scenes, I'm like, oh, I actually miss the big action scenes. Bring back Yen Wu Ping, bring back the practical effects. I mean, honestly, we got 6 cars that blew up on the street of San Francisco, and like that's the most practical effect we got in the whole thing. And yeah, don't forget the Matrix NFT they sold around the movie that Paris Stu says. I actually don't know what you're referring to. So yeah, I mean, overall, I mean, it's disappointing that it's not inspiring. It's disappointing that it's not fun to watch. It's disappointing that it's not enjoyable. But hey, I just spoke for 40 minutes about it. It obviously inspired me to think. So at least that's one element of the Matrix that it's true to. Um, but anyway, that's it from me. I'm probably going to do another video. I know my friend Diego Rosaron wants to talk about the movie. There's definitely more granularity we can get into talking about the postmodern critique. Although, really, I mean, we covered it all in my old Wisecrack podcasts and videos and stuff like that. Anyway, that's it from me, guys. Ultimately, the movie is just fucking sad. Poor Lana and fucking A. All right, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.